The first thing Rowan noticed about the Viking camp was the smell of death. It hung in the air like a fog, sweet and rotting, the unmistakable odor of wounds that had not been cleaned, of men who were dying slowly because no one knew how to save them. The stench clung to everything, the furs, the food, the very dirt beneath his feet. Rowan had been a soldier for 7 years, had fought in a dozen battles, had seen more death than most men twice his age. But he had never seen anything like this. The Warband of Jarl Halvar was dying, not from battle, though they had certainly seen their share of that, but from neglect, from ignorance, from a simple lack of knowledge that could have saved them if only someone had taken the time to learn. Rowan was 22 winters old, a soldier from the southern kingdom of Eldoria. He had been captured 3 days ago, after his unit had been overwhelmed in a skirmish along the border. He had watched his comrades fall, one by one. First his friend Aldrich, who had taken an arrow to the chest and bled out in Rowan's arms. Then his captain, Elara, who had been cut down by a Viking axe while trying to rally the troops. Then the others, scattered and broken, running for their lives. Rowan had fought until his sword broke, until his arms gave out, until a blow to the back of his head had sent him tumbling into darkness. He had awoken bound and bruised, his head throbbing, his mouth dry as dust. Now he knelt in the mud of the Viking camp, his wrists bound behind his back, his body aching, his spirit battered but not broken. Around him, the warriors of the Warband went about their business, but there was no energy in their movements, no life in their eyes. They moved like men who had already given up, who were simply waiting for the end. Their faces were gaunt, their shoulders slumped, their steps heavy. They were a people defeated, even in victory. They had won the battle against Rowan's unit, but they were losing the war against something far more insidious, despair. Rowan noticed these things because he had been trained to notice. His mother had been a healer, a woman of great skill who had traveled from village to village, tending to the sick and the wounded. She had taught Rowan the properties of every herb in the forest, the way to clean a wound, the way to set a bone, the way to bring a fever down. She had taught him to see the body as a map, with every symptom a clue leading to the source of the illness. His father had been a soldier, a man who had risen through the ranks through sheer determination and tactical brilliance. He had taught Rowan to read a battlefield, to anticipate an enemy's move, to find the weakness in any formation. He had taught him that war was not about strength alone, it was about intelligence, patience, and the ability to see what others missed. Rowan had combined their lessons into a skill set that had made him invaluable to his own army, and now he suspected might make him invaluable to his captors. The Warband was in crisis. He could see it in the way the warriors moved, too slowly, too heavily, as if they were carrying an invisible weight. He could see it in the way the Jarl's tent was constantly surrounded by advisors with worried faces, their voices raised in argument, their hands waving in frustration. He could see it in the wounded men lying on the ground outside the healer's tent, their wounds festering, their faces pale as parchment, their eyes glossy with fever. They were dying, and no one seemed to know how to stop it. The healers, if they could be called that, were applying the same treatments over and over, expecting different results. They were using herbs that treated pain but not infection, bandages that trapped dirt instead of keeping it out. Every day more men fell ill. Every day more men died. Rowan had been sitting in the mud for hours, watching when a young warrior stumbled past him and collapsed. The boy, he could not have been more than 16, had a gash on his leg that had turned black at the edges, the skin hot to the touch, the flesh swelling with infection. The wound had been poorly stitched and pus oozed from between the threads. The boy's breathing was shallow, his pulse weak. The other warriors walked past him, shaking their heads. "He is lost," one of them said, his voice flat. "Nothing can save him now, the gods have claimed him." Another spat on the ground. "We should put him out of his misery. A quick death is better than this slow rot." But Rowan knew differently. He had seen this before. He had treated this before. He knew that if someone did not act soon, the boy would be dead by morning. "You there?" that Rowan called out. His voice was hoarse from thirst, but it carried across the camp. "The boy with the leg wound. Get me to him, and I can save him. I can save his life." The warriors stared at him. One of them laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "A prisoner? A southerner? You think you know more than our healers? You think your southern magic can undo what the gods have ordained?" "I know I have seen that wound before," Rowan said, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. "I know that if you do not clean it and pack it with yarrow and comfrey, he will be dead before the sun rises. I know that your healers have been using the wrong herbs. They are treating the pain, not the infection. That is why your men keep dying. That is why you have lost a dozen warriors to wounds that should have been survivable." The warriors exchanged glances, uncertainty flickering across their faces. One of them went to fetch the jowl. Halvar emerged from his tent a few minutes later, his face haggard, his eyes tired. He was a large man, broad-shouldered and thick-chested, but there was a frailty to him now that had nothing to do with age. His skin was pale, his hair thinning, his hands trembling slightly. He had been a great warrior once, Rowan could see, but grief and exhaustion had worn him down, had carved lines into his face that should not have been there. He had lost his wife years ago, his eldest son in battle, and now he was losing his warband one man at a time. "You claim you can save my men," Halvar said, his voice low and rough like stones grinding together. "Why should I believe you? You are my enemy. You have every reason to lie, to let us suffer, to watch us die." Rowan met his gaze without flinching. "Because I have nothing to gain by lying," he said. "Because I am a prisoner and my life is in your hands. Because watching men die when you know you could save them is a kind of torture that I would not wish on anyone." He paused, his gray eyes steady on the jowls. "And because your son, the young warrior with the leg wound, does not deserve to die for lack of a simple herb that grows at the edge of this very camp." Halvar's eyes widened. "How do you know he is my son? No one told you. No one pointed him out." "I did not need to be told," Rowan said. "The way you look at him, the concern in your eyes, the way your hand twitches toward him every time he moves. A father's love is not something that can be hidden even in a camp of warriors." He paused. "You have lost too much already, Jowl. Do not lose him too. Let me help you." Halvar stared at him for a long moment, the silence stretching between them like a blade. The warriors around them held their breath. Then, slowly, the Jowl nodded. "Cut his bonds," he said to his warriors. "Give him whatever he needs, water, cloth, herbs. If he saves my son, he will be rewarded. If he fails, he will die. Those are my terms." Rowan's hands were freed, the ropes falling away from his raw, chafed wrists. He staggered to his feet, his legs weak from days of captivity, and was led to the boy's side. The wound was bad, worse than he had thought from a distance. The infection had spread to the bone, and the flesh around it was black and rotting. The smell was almost unbearable, a sickly sweetness that made his stomach turn. But it was not too late. It was never too late until the heart stopped beating. He called for water, for clean cloths, for a knife heated in the fire until the blade glowed red. He worked quickly, efficiently, his hands steady despite his fatigue. He cleaned the wound with a precision that made the watching warriors wince, cutting away the dead flesh with a heated knife, cauterizing the blood vessels to stop the bleeding. He packed the hollow with a poultice of crushed yarrow and comfrey, herbs he had spotted growing at the edge of the camp that very morning. He wrapped the leg in clean linen, tight but not too tight, and sat back on his heels, his hands covered in blood. "Now we wait," he said. "If the fever breaks by morning, he will live. Keep him warm. Give him water mixed with a pinch of salt and honey. It will help replace what he has lost." He looked up at Halvar. "I have done all I can. The rest is up to him, and the gods." That night, Rowan slept on the ground outside the boy's tent. He did not sleep well. The cold seeped through his thin clothes, and the sounds of the camp kept him awake, but he slept. He dreamed of his mother, of her hands gentle on his face, of her voice singing him to sleep. He dreamed of his father, of the lessons he had taught, of the battles he had fought. He dreamed of home, of the green hills and clear streams, of the life he had left behind. And when dawn came, the boy's fever had broken. His skin was cool, his breathing steady. He opened his eyes, blue like his father's, and looked at Rowan with something like wonder. "You saved me," the boy said. "The southerner saved me." Halvar was kneeling beside his son, tears streaming down his face. He had not cried in years, had not allowed himself to cry, but now the tears came freely. "Thank you," he said to Rowan. "Thank you for not letting him die." He turned to the warriors who had gathered around them. "This man is no longer a prisoner," he announced. "He is a healer. He is under my protection. Anyone who harms him answers to me." The days that followed were a blur of work. Rowan went from tent to tent, examining wounds, changing bandages, teaching the healers the methods he had learned from his mother. He showed them how to recognize the signs of infection, the redness, the swelling, the heat, the smell. He showed them how to clean a wound properly, not with the dirty water they had been using, but with boiled water and a pinch of salt. He showed them how to make poultices from the herbs that grew in the forest around the camp: yarrow for bleeding, comfrey for broken bones, willow bark for fever, garlic for infection. He showed them how to set bones, how to stitch cuts, how to bring down a fever with cold compresses and rest. The warriors watched him with a mixture of suspicion and gratitude. They called him the Southern Healer and the prisoner who knows things. Some of them still looked at him with hatred in their eyes, remembering the battles they had fought against his people, the friends they had lost to Southern swords. But others, the ones whose lives he had saved, whose friends he had helped, whose pain he had eased, began to look at him differently. They began to see him not as an enemy, but as a man, as someone who cared, as someone who belonged. One evening Halva found him sitting by the fire, scratching diagrams into the dirt with a stick. The Jarl lowered himself onto a log beside him, his joints creaking, his breath shallow. "What are you doing?" he asked. Rowan looked up from his drawings. "I am thinking," he said, "about your defenses, about the way you are arranged, about the way an enemy might attack." He pointed to the diagram. "You have your sentries too far apart. There is a gap here between the eastern and western posts that a small group of attackers could slip through unnoticed. Your supply tents are clustered together. One torch and you lose everything, all your food, all your weapons, all your winter stores. And your healer's tent is too far from the front lines. By the time a wounded man reaches it, he has already lost too much blood." Halvar stared at him, his tired eyes wide. "You have been in this camp for less than 2 weeks," he said. "How do you know all of this? How do you see what my own warriors have missed for years?" Rowan set down the stick and met the Jarl's gaze. "I have been watching," he said. "I have been trained to watch. My father was a soldier, and he taught me to see the battlefield with a soldier's eyes, to look for weaknesses, for gaps, for opportunities. My mother was a healer, and she taught me to see the body with a healer's hands, to look for the source of the pain, the root of the illness. I have spent my whole life learning to see what others miss." He gestured to the camp around them. "And I have spent the last 2 weeks learning to see you. Your warband is dying, Jarl. Not from battle, from neglect, from ignorance, from a lack of knowledge that I can provide. Let me help you, not just as a healer, as an advisor, as someone who wants to see you survive." Halvar was silent for a long moment. The fire crackled between them, sending sparks up into the darkness. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the distant howl of a wolf. "You ask a great deal," the Jarl said finally. "You ask me to trust a man who was my enemy a fortnight ago. You ask me to change the way I have done things for 20 years. You ask me to bet the lives of my people on the word of a Southerner." "I know," Rowan said, "but I am not asking you to trust me blindly. I am asking you to watch, to listen, to see for yourself whether what I say is true. And if you find that I am wrong, you can still kill me. I will not try to stop you. I will not beg for mercy." Halvar studied him for a long moment, his tired eyes searching Rowan's face. Then he nodded slowly. "Show me," he said. "Show me what you would change, and I will watch, I will listen. But if you betray me, if you lead my people astray, I will kill you with my own hands." The weeks that followed were a blur of hard work and harder decisions. Rowan reorganized the camp's defenses, moving the sentries, closing the gaps, repositioning the supply tents so that they were spread out and harder to destroy. He established a triage system for the wounded, so that the most critical cases were treated first, the less critical second, the walking wounded last. He trained the healers in new techniques, how to conserve their supplies, how to prioritize their patients, how to recognize when a wound was beyond saving, and when to focus on comfort instead of cure. He taught the warriors basic first aid, how to bind a wound, how to stop bleeding with pressure, how to keep a fallen comrade alive until the healers could arrive. The camp began to change. The men began to look healthier, to move more quickly, to sleep more soundly. The death rate dropped from 1 or 2 a day to 1 or 2 a week. The morale rose, slowly but surely, as the warriors realized that they were no longer doomed, that they had a chance, that someone was fighting for them. And the warriors began to look at Rowan not as a prisoner, not as an enemy, but as a leader, as one of their own. But it was not just the camp that was changing. Halva was changing too. The Jarl began to seek out Rowan's company, to ask his opinion on matters both great and small. He listened when Rowan spoke, really listened, in a way that he had not listened to anyone in years. He began to smile more often, to laugh at Rowan's dry jokes, to sit with him by the fire long after the other warriors had gone to sleep. And Rowan found himself looking forward to those evenings, found himself feeling something he had not expected to feel, something that felt almost like friendship, almost like something more. One night as they sat together in the darkness, Halvar spoke of his past. "I had a son," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "His name was Eric. He was brave and clever and kind. He was everything a father could hope for in a child. He was supposed to lead this warband after I was gone, to carry on my legacy, to build something that would outlast me." He paused, his jaw tightening, his hands clenching into fists. "He died 3 years ago, in a battle that should have been won. He had a plan, a good plan, a clever plan, a plan that would have saved lives, but I did not listen. I thought I knew better because I was older, because I had more experience, because I was the Jarl and he was just a boy. I was wrong. He died because of my arrogance, because I was too proud to listen." Rowan reached out and touched his hand. The Jarl's fingers were cold, trembling slightly. "I am sorry," Rowan said. "I cannot imagine what that feels like. I cannot imagine losing a child, watching them die, knowing that you could have prevented it." Halvar looked at him, his eyes wet with unshed tears. "You remind me of him," he said. "The way you think, the way you see things that others miss, the way you care about people who have no reason to deserve your care. You remind me of everything I lost." He paused, his voice cracking. "I do not want to lose you too, Rowan. I do not want to make the same mistake again." Rowan's heart pounded. He had not expected this vulnerability, this admission of feeling. "You will not lose me," he said. "I am not going anywhere. I am not your son, Halvar, but I am your friend. I am your ally. I am someone who will fight beside you, not because I have to, but because I want to." Halvar turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through Rowan's. His grip was warm, steady. "Stay," he said. "Not as a prisoner, not as a healer, not as an advisor, as something more, as someone I can trust, as someone I can love." Rowan looked at their joined hands, at the firelight flickering across Halvar's face, at the hope in his tired eyes. He had never expected to find love in a Viking camp. He had never expected to find a home among his enemies. But here, in this unlikely place, with this unlikely man, he had found something he had been searching for his whole life. "I will stay," he said, "for as long as you want me." The weeks that followed were the happiest of Rowan's life. He and Halvar worked side by side, planning, strategizing, building. They led the warband together, making decisions as equals, trusting each other with their lives and the lives of their people. They talked late into the night about everything and nothing, about the past and the future, about the people they had loved and lost. And they fell in love, slowly, quietly, in a way that felt as natural as breathing. But the past does not stay buried. The enemy that had been threatening the warband for months finally made its move. A rival clan, larger and better equipped, had been tracking them, waiting for the right moment to strike. And that moment came at dawn, when the camp was still asleep, when the sentries were groggy from the night watch and the fires were low. The attack was sudden and brutal. Warriors poured over the walls, their axes gleaming in the grey light, their war cries splitting the morning air. Rowan woke to the sound of screaming and the clash of steel. Halvar was already on his feet, his sword in his hand, his face pale with fear. "Stay here," he commanded. "Do not leave this tent." I cannot protect you if you are out there." But Rowan could not stay. He had seen the enemy's formation from the hilltop days ago, had noted its strengths and weaknesses, had memorized their movements. He knew where they would strike, how they would move, where they would be vulnerable. He grabbed a sword from the weapons rack, a blade he had never held before, heavy and unfamiliar, and ran into the chaos. He found Halvar pinned down by 3 warriors, his back against a supply cart, his sword arm bleeding. The Jarl was fighting bravely, but he was outnumbered, outmatched. His movements were slowing, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Rowan did not hesitate. He charged into the fray, his blade flashing, his movements precise and deadly. He had been trained to fight, not as well as the Vikings, but well enough. He cut down one warrior, then another, until Halvar was free. "What are you doing?" Halvar shouted, his voice raw. "I told you to stay. I told you to stay safe." "I told you I would stay with you," Rowan shouted back, his chest heaving. "I did not say I would hide while you died. I did not say I would let you face this alone." The battle raged for hours, but in the end, the Warband prevailed. They drove the enemy back, chased them into the forest, watched them disappear over the hills. The victory was hard won, and many had fallen, but they had survived, and they had Rowan to thank for it. Halvar stood in the center of the camp, his chest heaving, his sword dripping with blood. He looked at Rowan, at the gash on his arm, at the blood on his face, at the exhaustion in his eyes, and he felt something he had not felt in years. Gratitude, wonder, love. "You saved us," he said. "You saved all of us. Without you, we would have been slaughtered." Rowan shook his head, swaying on his feet. "I helped," he said, "but it was your warriors who did the fighting. Your people who did the dying. I just showed them where to stand. I just gave them a reason to hope." Halvar stepped forward and pulled him into his arms, holding him tight despite the blood and the sweat and the grime. "You are not a prisoner anymore," he said. "You are not a healer. You are not an advisor. You are my partner, my equal, my heart, and I will spend the rest of my life proving it to you." The warriors gathered around them, their faces tired but triumphant. They had seen what Rowan had done. They had seen him fight, seen him lead, seen him risk his life for people who had once been his enemies, and they knew in that moment that he was one of them, more than one of them. He was their brother. He was their savior. "Rowan," one of the warriors called out. "Rowan." Another joined in, then another. Soon the whole camp was chanting his name, their voices rising into the morning sky, echoing off the mountains. Rowan looked at Halvar, his eyes wet with tears. "What happens now?" he asked. Halvar took his hand and led him to the center of the camp. "Now," he said, "we build a new warband. A better warband, one that fights not for glory or gold but for each other. One that heals its wounded and honors its fallen. One that welcomes strangers and judges them not by where they come from, but by what they do." He turned to face his people. "This man," he said, pointing to Rowan, "was our enemy. He is now our brother. He has saved our lives, not once, but many times. He has shown us that strength is not just about the sword, it is about the heart. And I, for one, am proud to call him mine." The warriors cheered, the women wept, the children who had been hiding in the tents crept out to see what all the noise was about. And Rowan, the prisoner who had changed the fate of the warband, stood in the arms of the man he loved and knew that he had finally found his home. Years later, the warband of Jarl Halvar was legendary. They had conquered no kingdoms, burned no villages, taken no slaves, but they had survived when all the others had fallen. They had thrived when all the others had faded. And they had done it by following a simple rule: judge a person not by where they come from, but by what they do. Rowan and Halvar grew old together, their hair silvering, their steps slowing, but their love never dimmed. They sat by the fire every night, close enough to touch, close enough to feel each other's warmth. And when Halvar finally passed, old and worn and full of years, Rowan did not weep. He held his hand and whispered, "You were my enemy once. Now you are my forever."